Hypergrowth, you tend to be doing things very differently than if you're just trying to grow 2% or 5% or 10%. And so,
Right.
I
Can
mean,
you
everybody
imagine
would like,
Coca-Cola going, hey, I want to grow 20,000%.
yeah.
Planet Earth does not have that much.
But I mean, you talk to any company that started like a SaaS-based business and they have software, and it's like, hey, they would love to do this, but most just aren't capable of doing it. And so the wise ones are asking those questions before they have 200 employees. And so it's a lot of the people that they have on the team, it's processes in place, and it's
Welcome to the Business Ownership Podcast, brought to you by Awareness Strategies, helping you navigate the waters between entrepreneurship and ownership.
Hey there, peeps. This is Michelle Medlick, and I'm super glad that you're here with us today because I'm here with my most amazing guest, Kurt. Kurt, thank you so much for being here with us today.
hey, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So give everybody the highlight of who you are and what you do for business.
So yeah, my name is Kurt Uhlir. I've been a serial and parallel entrepreneur for many years. I've invested in and or been in leadership on more than 60 acquisitions at this point. So I tend to work with more established companies. I've done the 0 to 1 thing, that 1 million thing. That's not where I'm good at. I'm good at companies that I help them scale. So that's tend to be where I am. I just stepped out of 5.5 or 6 years in the real estate space, specifically with EXP Realty, the largest real estate company in the world right now. And so that was a ton of fun. But I tend to help with smaller companies, so ones that are not multi-billions, but sometimes. So, but I have a heart for entrepreneurs and people getting started. And so despite where I tend to be from a day-to-day job, I tend to always be coaching and counseling and offering free tips to those that are trying to figure it out. Because you're not just providing for your family, you're providing for everybody else's family that works for you.
Right. So before we get started, and we'll get into this in a second, I'm going to get a definition first, and then I'm going to backtrack.
Okay.
So usually when I'm talking business, I'm talking startup phase, growth phase, scaling phase,
Yep.
where you're just throwing money at the problem, and then exit. So when you say scaling, what do you mean by that?
Usually for me, it's companies that have where I step in full time. It'll be companies that have about $50 million a year in revenue or more, and then we'll scale it from there. I've been blessed to have been at multiple hypergrowth companies, and so companies that are trying to grow 2,000 or 20,000% tend to be the ones that reach me out. But from a business perspective, that's I invest and coach in companies that all the way down to maybe $500,000 to $1 million a year in revenue.
So what are some of the elements that make a hypergrowth company?
Hypergrowth, you tend to be doing things very differently than if you're just trying to grow 2% or 5% or 10%. And so,
Right.
I mean,
Can you
everybody
imagine
would like,
Coca-Cola going, hey, I want to grow 20,000%.
yeah.
Planet Earth does not have that much.
But I mean, you talk to any company that started like a SaaS-based business and they have software, and it's like, hey, they would love to do this, but most just aren't capable of doing it. And so the wise ones are asking those questions before they have 200 employees. And so it's a lot of the people that they have on the team, it's processes in place, and it's the willingness to be wrong, which is, I think, the biggest thing for an entrepreneur, no matter what size company they are, but in leadership is like what holds people back from growing is they think that they're right. And so I think the one tip for everybody is like, gosh, what nobody realizes and makes so much sense when it comes out is when you are wrong and when you are right feels exactly the same until there's data and you realize this is what I've been doing in my business for the last year, and it was dumb. And the data all of a sudden shows you in that usually very fast thing, and you weren't doing it because you thought it was the wrong thing. And so a lot of times, especially from hypergrowth, I'm looking for companies where they're trying to acknowledge that. And so.
Right. So typically a hypergrowth company in my experience is a SaaS company. Are there any outside of that realm?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually seen some regional lawn care things do that. Actually, I just stepped out of, I mentioned EXP Realty. The company did not exist 15 years ago, and Glenn Sanford founded it. And now there's 3 ways you kind of count how big like a residential real estate company is. And people think about Keller and Coldwell because those brands have been around. But EXP Realty didn't exist 15 years ago, and it's now number 1 and 2 of the 3 categories, and it's number 4 in the third category. That's a hypergrowth company. You start something, it takes longer than you expect to get it going, and then you go quickly from hey, they also ran position to a number 1 position like that.
So let's kind of back up the bus a little bit. And how did you get into acquisition as your thing?
I didn't intend to. So I came out of college planning to go work for investment banks and being that kind of nerd that would talk between the high-end business people that came up with equations and the people that would code it out. Um, and I got a call from an executive search firm. I'd started 2 companies when I was 14, one of which I ended up selling off, and the other one still was ran for quite some time. And they were like, "I know who you're talking to. Can you come talk to this little company called Navtech?" And I was like, "No." And so I got a call back that enticed me to come out for my conversation, and I met Saladin Khan. And so he was great. And so actually, if you think about, most of us have used Google Maps. We put it on a website or marketing campaigns. They're still small compared to, from the Google Maps perspective, compared to this company that we took from $85 million a year in revenue to 1.44 billion. So I joined in 2000, and think about all the things that happened with spatial data. MapQuest was a thing, and using this company's data, but like we didn't have phones that would do real-time navigation and video games. And so I was at that company, and that's actually, Saladin convinced me to come work for him. I worked for him and this woman named Denise Doyle, and 11 industries literally just ballooned because of our data globally. And so I would walk out of these crazy meetings with Siemens VDO that makes a nav system for a Lexus into UPS Logistics, into a 3rd-hour meeting then with my team that was changing how Microsoft builds video games. And so I didn't know what was happening at the time. Is we were just at that place where you see a lot of failure, and that gives you a lot of ways to not fail next time.
Love it. So when it comes to that kind of vision, that kind of growth, I think there's a special kind of something going on with those individuals. What do you notice is the kind of the commonality in people like that can do that?
I think the commonality, it's actually not, it's not technology, it's not back skill set, it's a mentality that says they have a vision for the outcomes that they would like, but they don't care about the outcomes in any shorter or medium term. They care only about leading indicators. And so I think for marketers position, what the unique thing is, everybody wants sales to go up, or everybody wants more leads. If you go go to marketing agency, well, that's it. That's something that's out there ahead of time. What are all the leading indicators beforehand? Because what I've seen so often is I come into organizations and I'm like, well, why did you fire your chief revenue officer? Well, we weren't to where I wanted from a numbers perspective. This be a private equity group that had invested $500 million in the company, and I go through and look at all the data, and the woman that they let go was beyond ahead of where she should have been. She was killing it from all the leading indicators, but it just hadn't hit the outcomes that the investor wanted yet, and they were having different conversations. So I find that's actually the one thing that actually tends to hold back companies. But that's the commonality I see with people who unlock hypergrowth, but especially those that just are successful in business in general. They care about the process and all those leading indicators much less than they actually do about, like, how much money did I make at the end of the day? That does matter, but we'll get there if the leading indicators are right.
Love it. So when you're working with a company, what kind of things do they have going on in their company that they would bring it to you and go, here, Kurt, solve our problems?
Yeah, great question. Sometimes they don't have the data, and so they don't know if they're on the right track or not. But more than or not, they've hit what they feel like is a ceiling in their business. And so whether that's a $10 million company or it's a $500 million a year company, they've been at this place, and sometimes they've just reached it, but they're like, we believe that we're not going to go past it. But very often they've been at this threshold for 3 to 5, 7 years, and they can't find that inflection point past. And so they come to me because that's one of the skill sets I have, is to dig through to find out what's actually holding them back. But more than that, help them unlock an inflection point so they can get back on the track for growth. And I don't have that gene where, like, if you give me negative feedback, I really just don't care. And it annoys my wife sometimes. And it's like, I care, but it does, like, I can just turn and go sideways as well. And so from a business perspective, I don't care about negative feedback, because if I come in for a company, whether full-time or coaching, I'm only seeking to understand. And people are usually trying to solve a problem, like in that inflection point, and they keep just hitting up against that. And they want to get past it, and they're not trying to. So
Awesome. So when they're at that point, I would think that would be the ultimate frustration, is being at that ceiling for 5 to 7 years, going, like, seriously, what do we do? Is it because they're not seeing kind of the vision beyond that, or they're just not seeing kind of what is that one piece of the dam that we have to pull out in order to break it open?
It's usually a lot of things from an operations perspective when I dig in, a lot of things, especially from a branding perspective. I mean, I think no matter whether you're a single person that's running an electrical company, or you have five bands that are doing electrical, or you're a big billion-dollar company, we've had this shift in marketing. Pay-per-click ads are great. There's still a place for brand. I mean, branding is bigger than ever, but we've shifted to the influence economy. Your clients are talking about you, no matter whether you're a B2C customer client, a B2B client, and companies don't realize that. And so that's part of the problem that they have, is that's holding them back, is they're using outdated marketing techniques. And so nothing wrong with that. Pay-per-click's wonderful. There's so many things that, like, email is still like probably the best tool that I have for anything, but how the messages that they're sending out are messages that worked 20 years ago, not messages that necessarily work today. But really, I think even to uncover a lot of that, I tend to come in, and one of the things I find out, I come into a lot of organizations where people, if I talk to them, they're going to say all the words that kind of identify that they think that they're a servant leader. And if we go through and look at what they're doing, how they interact with their teams, they're not. And I just say that of like, there's a lot of different styles of leadership or flavors when you get into it. But to me, it's only you're an authoritative leader, which ultimately is do what I say, Michelle, the way I say it, or you're going to get fired. I mean, that's ultimately underneath that. And some people, we've all seen the micromanager, but there's a lot of micromanaging within there. There's a lot of lack of trust, but people don't realize it. They're great people. They don't realize that the unlock is the other side of that, because it's a very binary thing that says, look, I should show up every day just figuring out how do I serve my team. Some cases, you could be the CEO at Disney, and maybe you need to pick up a phone today and actually help somebody else out. But it's that type of attitude that says, hey, my job is to figure out how I serve people. And people they don't realize it. And it takes somebody like me that's done this a lot of companies to point it out. But even if they have, they don't know how to get out of those habits. Because a lot of times, like, Michelle, you've gotten to be really good at what you're doing, where you're at, because you're good at things. And I'm really good at a lot of things. And the hardest thing is being like, well, if somebody gives me an email copy, if we keep that, could you or I make it better? Probably. But at some level, if I can only improve stuff 5%, 10%, that gets micromanaging, it deflates the people. And so I'll step in, but there's other ways to give feedback too, especially if it's going to be major feedback, because I want this person to get better and not have to come back to me next time. I want to disciple them to multiply my knowledge in emails or growth or pallet operations or something.
So when you go into a company, if you're seeing things like, oh, wow, your tech stack is totally out, your leadership style is not taking into account your frontline problems, like there's so much there to unravel. On one side, it's like, yay, opportunity is endless. There's a lot of room for growth here. How do you kind of wrap a CEO's head around the idea that not that everything you've done up till now is wrong, but that there are ways that we can improve almost everything you got going on here?
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to it comes out just from asking through conversations about what's their time horizon personally. If they've raised money, then they don't control the timeline anymore. And most people don't realize that. The moment you take, whether it's an angel investment check, venture capital check, or later private equity round, I mean, public is a different thing unto itself, but it's like those investors have their own time frame about when they're expecting to get things back. And so there may not be time to change a tech stack. We could change a marketing tech stack. That's different than a core software tech stack for what they've built. And so it's asking them, like, when do other people expect money to be delivered? What's their personal time frame? Because I think a big thing what holds companies back too is they like maybe the CEO is only thinking like he or she only wants to be there for another 3 years. Okay, well, we need to work within that time frame then, or they need to say this is a 5-year change, and we need to find somebody else so that I can get out sooner than that. And so when you start that conversation, then it starts to frame the other thing. When you go, all right, maybe the tech stack's not what we need it to be. And okay, how did it get this way? Well, that's probably going to mean changing your product leaders. And a lot of people don't want to do that. You're friends with the people you work with. But that's also like, who do they hire? You reframe who they hire and what they look for. Unfortunately, too many people hire at all levels, especially executive, somebody that they want to go to dinner with, a barbecue with, they want to hang out with. And I'm like, That's what they mean by culture. And I'm like, what you should be looking for is culture, and that you would see in somebody's actions if they could never speak. Do they have a bias towards action? Do they enjoy and thrive with and foster healthy conflict? Things like that are things that we change how they think about who they hire.
Love it. So when you're mentioning somebody wants to get out in 3 years, in my experience, that means you really only have 1 year to, to get them to exit, because we're going to need the other 2 years to figure out how to kind of not break the system. Because I've found a lot of, especially when it's founder based, is they'll have a lot of themselves built into their systems and none of it is itemized, documented, and you don't know why they're doing what they're doing.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think you have a year to get the business to any sort of real growth level that you'd like. I think if you wanted to exit in 3 years, for me, it's the first year. I do want to document as possible, but I probably stretch it to you have up to 2 years. But the next hire that I would have is, like, I had this woman who worked for me for years named Mandy. Like, she was great at so many things, but she had this superpower that very few people have. She could just almost like breathe standard operating procedures. And so one of the things that's great, was great for Mandy, besides everything that she did actually implementing, is, I mean, one, I could create some sort of SOP myself, which every founder, the way you're saying, should try to do. And then they should try to only follow their SOP to do it the next time. But what's much more productive for them is you hire somebody like Mandy. Maybe they're not as good as her, but somebody like Mandy could sit next to that person and watch them do things, or just do a screen recording and generate a 30-page SOP about this process, about how they interact with clients, and detailed and hyperlinked to other things. And so, like, you put her into like all of your meetings, let her stalk you for like 3 months, and everything is going to be documented, whether you like it or not.
And then all of a sudden everybody's going, oh, that's why we do what we do. Oh, okay, that makes sense
Yeah.
now.
but most people, it's like, to your point, like, the founder's in there, and because they've been really good at doing things, and that's great for him or her. But the problem is they're often not good at documenting things. And so, like, acknowledge what they're good at, and, like, are you actually going to sit down and document it? How many months or years have you been saying, I need to hand off this thing that I do all the time? If it's more than like 2 months, just acknowledge that's not your skill set. And it could just mean that doesn't hit your dopamine enough centers for you to do it. And you need to hire somebody to do that, or retask somebody to do that. And then, the weight's off of you. Now you just have to figure out how to interact with that person to let them be successful documenting what you're doing.
Absolutely. So can you give us an example of a Cinderella story of one of your clients?
Good Cinderella story. Yeah, so I'm actually working on what I'm hoping is going to be a Cinderella story right now. But one of the biggest Cinderella stories was a company that I stepped into called Vitru. We ended up selling to Oracle for a little more than $300 million. I got brought in to kind of be the right-hand man of Reggie Bradford. And so he ended up mentoring me later. And so, like, I did not have like that perfect, actually, like, job description when I got hired. Like, he gave me some title, I'm sure what it was, but the job description was, we've gotten big enough. They'd raised a little more than $30 million. He goes, I've gotten big enough that I can't be in all the meetings. I need you to take every meeting that I can't. That's kind of interesting. So for me joining to 16 months later, we had an offer from Oracle. We were raising a bunch more money to raise another round, and it became an acquisition. So we ended up selling that company. And so, wonderful for everybody involved. And most of us have actually seen the results from that as well. I mean, it was largely a social media management company before that was a thing. And so, huge bit of operations that was already handled by the COO named Jim and things. But as far as all the new stuff, because they were able to let me come in and go, sales are going well enough that could raise $30 million, but could they go better? And so I literally got in and I started stalking all the sales meetings, and they were selling features. And so this was back in 2010, 2011, where it was 2 big enterprise plays and literally scheduling things for Samsung Mobile and Apple and others. And that was great. And but I have a way that can get us like an 85 to 90% meeting setup, and my close rate's wonderful. And Reggie hated hearing what I said next. And I was like, because there was value, and there was all sorts of value. But if you think back to like 2010, there was 2 things starting to drive. One, yes. So marketers were starting to say, we need some sort of tool like this. but the legal teams were saying, we need to know who's approving wording that goes on in Coca-Cola's Twitter accounts. And we need to, was there approvals? Who's posting? Can we get reports back? And so I basically had a fire insurance kind of policy that said, well, and so the pitch kind of changed. So when it wasn't selling the features, it was a wonderful platform, did a lot of value, but the pitch changed to basically, hey, Michelle, you're the vice president at this, mid-sized company. You're going to have to pick one of these systems in the next 2 years. I'm going to happen to be by your office on Thursday next week. Would you like to have that meeting or not? Because I'm pretty sure your general counsel is starting to ask some of these questions. Well, subtly it was underlying then that the sales was, well, if your boss's boss finds out that you didn't take the meeting, you might be fired because they want it from a compliance perspective. And then once we got in there, then they were like, oh, this does the stuff I'm going to want. And so that's kind of one of the Cinderella stories that they all come in all sorts of different flavors. And that was not at all what Reggie and others wanted to hear. And Erica, who ran the marketing team, she did what she should have been. She was telling all the customer success stories from here's what could be, here's what Apple's being successful, and Samsung Mobiles and Shane Ribshack. But what was getting us in the door was selling fire insurance.
I love it. Well, and you also have an interesting, I like how he hired you to be the right-hand man, because oftentimes you get founders that go, I just need a mini-me. I just need somebody that can do what I do and take over for me. And I have never heard a story or an example where it's been successful. So one, that's fascinating that it was successful. And two, fascinating that you're doing the exact opposite thing of what he wants you to do in the end, despite the fact that he found his mini-me.
Yeah. Well, I did take a lot of those meetings as well. He also, part of it is like, he very much cared about what the outcomes was going to be, not how we got there. He knew what sales numbers, he knew where we were going to go, and he was open enough to perhaps being wrong. And he was good with some of us in explaining how to get feedback, which is a big thing. I think how you show up. Some people want to be confronted in any situation. Some don't, or some only want to be confronted in private as well. And so, like working with Reggie specifically, I was able to read him and say he needed to always feel supported if we were in a group or in the boardroom. And he needed to know that if he said we're going to that mountain peak, that I was going to go towards that mountain peak. But if I disagreed with it, I was going to come to him in private and tell him why I thought we should be going over there. And so I think that's part of having that interaction, and where it's having healthy conflict, and where founders need to realize how you show up is very important to your team. Because if you don't provide an environment where they can come to you with things, well, then the entire risk of your company and growth hinges on that you are actually right. Because if they can't come to you, you've created an environment of fear that you could be going off a cliff and nobody would tell you. And they shouldn't, because their job's on the line.
Right. So when it comes to kind of those conversations, how did you manage that time sequence so that it wasn't just reiterating the same thing that had gone on in every meeting that you had just attended?
I'm a big believer in data, so it's experiments and data. And so I think that's also how you work through inflection points. Those of us that have found scale, there's a muscle memory that comes for, does this feel right? Well, that's good enough to convince me or you, those that have done that before. In some cases, many people I've worked with, executives, that I just said, this is what I feel, they'd be like, great, let's go put $10 million in that and go. But that doesn't convince most people, nor should it. And so I think, especially like on founder-led teams, that you have to have time for somebody like me to come in, or yourself, to be being that mad scientist, to be doing an experiment. But the entire thing is you need to put a time frame on it. How long am I going to run the experiment? And up front, especially if you're having somebody else do it, you should agree on, we talked about leading indicators. The outcomes will happen if the leading indicators are right. So let's agree up front what the leading indicators are. Because then what ends up happening otherwise is, hey, you have a head of marketing, you have a head of sales, you want to hit this number or get this many leads. And when you come back to them in 6 months or in 2 years, and they haven't hit that number, anything that they say is going to be defensive to you. And you're going to basically, they don't know it, you don't know it, but you're firing that person. When in fact, they might actually be well ahead of things. And because you all did not agree when you started the journey and said, we want to hit those numbers, it might happen faster than we want or longer, but these are all the little points that are going to tell us, are we along on the right direction? And if you do that up front, then when you come to them in 2 years and go, hey, why aren't we hitting our numbers? You can bring back up the scorecard. And hopefully you've been having that conversation throughout that time, not just then, but.
I love it. So you mentioned when people are hitting a ceiling and they can't get past that point, they're not hitting their self-perceived targets. And that frustration of it just popped right out of my head. So I'm just going to go straight into what are some of the frustrations that somebody might be having right now as they're listening to this, going, "Oh my God, Kurt, I need you so bad."
Some cases it's the sales, not their sales and revenues just are not increasing, or what happens more often and as well is their sales are increasing, but their profits are not. And they don't understand that. I really come from a profit first mentality. I don't care what size your company is. You need to be socking away money for yourself, your investors, or the company longer term. And that only comes if you're not continually a sales go up, just spending more money. I mean, there gets a point in the scaling where you say, for every $100 I put in, I get 120 over here. That's great. But unfortunately, most people I make a new $100, I spend 99 or $101. And so, and they can't prove what the outcome is going to be on the other side. And so sometimes it's that they're trying really hard. Sales are going up. Maybe they're not going up as much as they want, but at the end of the day, their net revenue is not increasing. And so there's that. Or they just keep churning, especially if it's a founder-led organization, they keep churning through leaders on the company. And if you go and ask them, they'll say that it was that person, or she couldn't get me through this leg. And I kind of give it the point that there's definitely a place where, hey, it's not you, it's the company. But very quickly though, you start to say, yeah, but if you've gone through like 3 CMOs, if you keep churning through other people at mid-level, it is you. That doesn't mean you need to go. But where people are starting to have problems with, they just keep going through multiple levels of leadership. Well, they'll come to me to go, I don't understand why we're not here. I don't understand why I'm hiring the wrong people. I don't understand how to find the right people. And usually it's actually that founder, they're the problem. Not that they need to go. They just need to change how they're interacting with people.
Love it. So I know our listeners are going to want more from you. How do they start their journey with you?
My personal website, Kurt Uhlir, UHLIR.com. You can also just search for high achieving servant leadership and I'll pop up, because that's what I'm going to preach. Don't ever come to work, come to bring me in if you want to talk about authoritative leadership, because I'm going to get that out of your company real quick.
I'm pretty sure you already got that one down pat anyway. So, you don't need to come to the meeting for that one. Awesome. So we will, of course, have all of Kurt's links in the show notes. Go ahead and scroll down and, of course, open up a new browser because we're not done yet. So I get to ask you, Kurt, at what point in life did you know you were special kind of crazy enough to think that you could become an entrepreneur?
14, unfortunately. I mentioned I started 2 LLCs, and that's because I was going to have to pay payroll taxes for people. So
I love that. That was just odd. So at 14 going, payroll taxes. I mean, most 14-year-olds, that's not really their biggest issue in life.
no, but I realized even then, like it was at 13 that I started scaling that business, and it's a very small town in Alabama. Selling was not the problem. I could walk door to door and take people's lawn care from the business just like that. But getting it to operate, operating was fine, but it's like, how do you do things with stuff? I went and hired a friend. Like, what are you getting at Wendy's? Oh, I can pay you twice that. Let's go get started right now. So I was just really good at operations. So.
That was so cool. And did you have a mentor that you brought into that to help you to kind of realize the nuances of business, or you're just like, hey, let's figure it out?
I just figured that out, really. My dad, I got started because my dad let me use his lawnmower until I said I had paper repairs, and I ended up having to buy a lawnmower just for that, and many lawnmowers for that. But I got started because of that. But he basically he made me figure out the tax stuff myself. He pointed out that I was going to have to, and then he made me find an accountant and figure it out myself. So that's mentoring in a way. It's just not like showing you exactly how to do it.
That is awesome. I love it. You have been absolutely awesome. Any last words for our peeps?
No, I love your approach for talking to business owners and founders. So keep doing it.
Love it. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And I know how valuable it is.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome. Peeps, thank you for being here with us today. Be sure to subscribe to the show, share it with your friends. We love helping entrepreneurs grow.
Are you running a business over 7 figures but still struggling with technology headaches? Pay attention, you do not want to miss this offer. This podcast episode is brought to you by Awareness Strategies, who is offering a custom-built digital adoption roadmap for anyone running a business over 7 figures who's wanting to grow their business in the next 5 years. And it's not just a roadmap, they offer full implementation as well if that scares the out of you. Check out awarenessstrategies.com/roadmap for more details today. The link's in the show's notes. Don't regret not doing this. Do it now. That's awarenessstrategies.com/roadmap.